There's no wonder a lot of people decide to buy brand new vehicles with the extraordinarily high prices. So buying used seems to make more sense, and clearly I'm a strong advocate for buying older used vehicles. I've had late model new vehicles, but I've only ever had one brand new vehicle in my life. But with all of that said, of course, we know that buying used vehicles comes with a host of pitfalls. As a matter of fact, we experienced one recently with one of our daughter's cars. We got absolutely taken for a ride, pardon the pun. And I want to kind of get to some of the major pitfalls when buying a used car, because while in one side you're trying to avoid some of the high costs of new vehicles, on the other side, there are some strong reasons why you might want to actually debate buying used at all and maybe just go straight to new. If you're not a savvy buyer and you're certainly one of these people that like to get in and out of a vehicle, maybe you don't know what to look for, you're not that technical, and you trust what other people say, you know what? Sometimes it's better just to go with a new vehicle, because let's break this down. Okay, so here, as I get out of my Ram here, this is a 2003 Ram, and this thing's been treating me pretty well for many years. I'm the second owner, and I bought it off the first owner, and it's been a great truck. But see, that's the thing. I'm the second owner. I know the first owner, it was family, and that's one of the major reasons why buying an older used vehicles is having some of that history. See, one of the big pitfalls that I've actually recently experienced, and I'm going to share the story over on Exotic Car Play Place here coming up within another week or so. But there is a big potential for getting totally ripped off. Now, how do you say that? Well, there's any number of reasons, not just price. Money talks, like they say, right? So buying an older used vehicle, sometimes you get a vehicle that you wonder if you paid too much, too little. You look fair market value, you look at Black Book, you look at all of these numbers, and these numbers start to just phase over in the long run. You just start to sort of wash over, and was this a good deal? Was that a good deal? This is fair condition, but it has higher mileage. And then this one was higher, rough condition, but it had lower mileage. And then you balance that out and you start thinking about how many owners has that one had. And then you start trying to make a decision whether that made sense to buy that vehicle. And a lot of it's just based on the hard numbers, but there's a lot of intangible things that a lot of people forget about. And one, of course, is the service history. Service history is a big one. One thing that you can get totally rooked by. The worst part is a vehicle that's been poorly serviced or deferred maintenance. So it could be a very, very low mileage vehicle, but it could be used and maybe it's just sat for the last 5 or 10 or maybe 15 years. There's a strong possibility that you could be getting into a lot more than you ever planned, because sometimes vehicles, even with really low mileage with deferred maintenance, are their own worst nightmare. They haven't been done, you haven't done oil services, you haven't done any of the cooling system flushes, the pH level changes, the coolant, the oil changes, of course, deteriorates, and sometimes the oil starts to build up moisture in there, and that can start to take a toll on the bottom end of the engine. And so sometimes having a vehicle that sits too long without the proper maintenance is a bigger challenge. And that's one big issue. I mean, let's take a look under the hood here, shall we? I'm going to pop the hood here, and we're going to take a look here. Now, the beauty with this vehicle, it hasn't had a lot of rest. It hasn't had a lot of relaxation, if it were. So I know the maintenance has been done because I drive this vehicle every day, and the previous owner more or less did too. And so when the vehicle won't start in the wintertime, you're going to do the battery change. But see, that's a problem. A vehicle that sits, you may not charge the battery, you may not use it. Batteries could be gone. A lot of times you get oil buildup, leaks, gaskets start to leak because sometimes there's issues of as things dry out, some of the older gaskets tend to leak sometimes. Bottom end of the engine, some parts start to corrode, cam lobes, things that don't see oil because they don't run. Normally when they're running, they're always covered in oil, so they're fine. But vehicles quite often that don't get that maintenance and that attention sometimes have issues. So, looking under an oily engine like this, a dirty engine isn't always a bad engine. Actually, a dirty engine is a sign that it's probably all original. And if it's running well, then, you're in a good spot. I've done water pumps and, the overflow tank and things like that, new batteries, plugs, oil services. But generally speaking, it's a relatively reliable engine because it's been, the service has been done. But that's the problem. When you buy a used vehicle, sometimes even low mileage is sometimes your worst enemy. Another thing you want to think about, you don't know. Sometimes people have all kinds of tricks. You hear there's all kinds of additives now people put into oil. You've heard the old adage about people putting sawdust in. I don't even want to say it because this might give people bad ideas. But people putting sawdust to reduce noise, at least it buys you a little bit of time while they're selling it. Sometimes people put no smoke additives in the fuel system. Why? So that it runs for a bit. Or they run the engine way low on oil so it also doesn't smoke. I actually experienced that once when I had an ATV I bought used, and I didn't even realize it. I ran it, ran good, it started well, and everything was nice. But unfortunately, what ended up happening was they actually, quite intentionally, from my perspective, is they ran it out of oil. They ran it right down, so there was no smoke. Of course there was no smoke, there was no oil to smoke. And so it ran well for the little bit that I ran, for the 5 minutes in the parking lot to test drive it. But I got it home, and I was doing my routine checks, and I pulled a dipstick and realized that, wait a minute, there's no oil in there. Well, that's not good. So I topped up the oil, started up the engine. Boy, the thing smoked out like there was no tomorrow, pretty much destroying all of the mosquitoes and fly population within the perimeter of 100 miles. So sometimes there's people that pull all kinds of shady practices, whether it's poor maintenance practices on engine, transmissions that are slipping. Sometimes there's additives that can fix some of that, stop leaks for coolant system issues. Sometimes it'll buy you a little bit of time. So people sometimes put additives in engines. Sometimes if they're too clean, you got to ask yourself why. They're usually trying to hide something. So clean engines are also something to be very, very skeptical on. If the vehicle is extraordinarily clean under the hood, there's a good chance that they're hiding something. Now, if it maybe has an oil leak or coolant leak, sometimes they want to represent it well. But for my take, what I've often found was vehicles that maybe have 50, 60, 80,000 miles on them, they will have grime, they will have dirt and dust, and they may have some oily residue in some spots. But my experience is usually when they're clean like that, like a whistle, sometimes they're hiding things. Now, it's not always the case. There are people that are particularly, caught on, taking care of their vehicle. But, looking at this truck here, it's well maintained, and I know the history of this vehicle, because that takes me to the next point. One of the other big pitfalls is not just poor maintenance or deceitful practices to hide, problem areas or to try to deceive you on some of the issues. Another big one, and this one here I'm going to be talking about here very, very soon, coming up on ECPP. This is actually shady, is hiding accident history. Title washing, you're hearing that's a common factor, that's a common thing. A lot of people are doing title washing, taking it across states, changing borders, and actually changing the VINs or removing some of those issues that they had that carried with the vehicle. Maybe it had a big accident history. Maybe it was underwater. Maybe it was flooded. We hear what's going on the East Coast, Florida. There's been no shortage of flood vehicles. So how do you get those vehicles back to market? Well, title wash. In some cases, you're able to get that into other jurisdictions, and then lo and behold, clean title. Well, this actually just so happened to us recently, and I'm not going to get into the whole story, but ultimately, we actually got hard done by a car dealer, a local dealer, a reputable franchise dealer from one of your favorites. And we'll get into that in, like I said, upcoming videos. You're going to want to check it out. But ultimately, we asked for a Carfax. We asked for the proof. We asked for the history. Well, they didn't have service history because, as most of these car lots are, the vehicles come, go, they trade, they auction. But they said, here's a Carfax. And they gave us one example. There was a $2,000 accident history on the vehicle. Okay, great. It's not great. I don't like to have any accident history. But that's all they had. And it was 2018. 2020, apparently, we didn't find out until recently. We were trying to sell the car 4 years later. And lo and behold, there's a big accident issue on the vehicle. Now, they didn't hide. As far as we can tell, they hid it from us. Why? Because here's the catch. The date stamp of the accident was almost to the date a year earlier than the date that we purchased the car. Okay, so what that means is you've got 365 days, maybe 12 months. Well, according to Carfax, their updates are anywhere from 2 to 3 months. So if you could anticipate even a 6-month time frame to get an accident that was representing on that vehicle to actually make it to Carfax, it should have been on there. But when we asked for the Carfax from said dealer, they gave us a Carfax, or copy of that $2,000 accident. It said, yeah, it's good. Otherwise, we just ran it through our shop. Service history's in place. Vehicle just had an oil change, and everything's good. So that's the problem. What you're finding now are a lot of these shady dealers, and we're going to expand on this greatly because this is a really shady practice now, hiding some of these things. The worst part is the value of the damage exceeded, and I mean grossly exceeded, the fair retail market value of that car at the time. How did they even approve that through insurance? But we'll talk about that as that time comes. For now, I just want to get to the point where shady practices, poor maintenance, neglected, abused vehicles are all risks when you're buying a used vehicle. Now, used vehicles do represent great value. You can sometimes get yourself amazing deals. When you think about a brand new truck for $80,000, and then I look at something like this, you can get something like this for maybe a few thousand, maybe $8,000. And you think, wow, I can get a truck that does the same things. You know, it has all of the same space inside. You've got 3 seats in the front. You know, you got 3 seats in the back. You've got, I mean, I can go, well, I wouldn't say off-roading with this. Certainly you can tow some weight with this thing. You've got a hitch, you've got the box, you've got everything that a new truck has, minus the big screens and maybe a sunroof and leather interior. But this does everything you need it to. So there's a huge amount of value in spending $8,000 or $5,000 on a truck that all it needs to do is do what these $80,000 trucks do. And the same thing goes with cars and SUVs. It's huge amount of value buying used cars. But the flip side of that, unless you're a great DIYer, unless you know all the routines, which we're going to share with you in the channel, unless you know all the pitfalls, the how-tos, the things to shop for and look for, as well specifically even when you're talking about some of the mechanical failures that you can do roadside checks, inspections, even before you take it in for a pre-purchase inspection, which coincidentally is another one of those things you want to do, is get a reputable dealer of that brand to do a once over, spend the $200-300, get them to check it over, especially if you're spending a significant amount of money. Always get a pre-purchase inspection that should give you a good rundown, because sometimes what they do is flush out some of the issues. With a good pre-purchase inspection, they might just tell you, you know what, the tires are down to 30% and the brakes are down to 20%. And then that might, just alone, everything else might check out, but that alone might mean that you have $4,000 worth of repairs coming up, and that might be a negotiation tactic. See, getting a pre-purchase inspection gives you peace of mind of what you're buying, as well as it gives you a bit of a bargaining tactic. Doing a Carfax, another thing that you definitely want to have done. That being said, I've lost a little bit of faith in that whole process, and time will tell as I flush this conversation out. But you know what? Those are always risks, but get a Carfax pre-purchase inspection, do a good roadside walk around, take it for a test drive, make sure it doesn't sound weird or make any strange noises, and ultimately, buying a used car can represent a huge value with these ridiculous prices people are paying for brand new vehicles today. So I'm going to definitely share some of these how-to tips as you go along, whether you're buying a used car or you just say, you know what, I don't need that. I don't need the hassle. I just want to buy a new car. 100%. It's lovely having a new car. Nobody's ever wrecked it. You know exactly where it's been. So I'll give you all those tips. And again, as always, be sure to drop a line down there. I'd like to hear your thoughts on any way you personally might have been absolutely screwed and scammed and you proved it in the paperwork. Hope to see each and every one in the next one, everybody. See you then. Bye-bye.